Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. As you can see behind me, I have symbols not of your favorite band, but of what might be your favorite or and least favorite political party, because everyone's talking about the debate. And so I thought we'd have a bit of a debate about music, specifically about political music. Now, traditionally in the rock world, most music that is political tends to veer towards a radical position, sometimes called a leftist position. In more recent terms, they've revived that 100-year-old term progressive to talk about the slant of music. And the list of such artists and such songs is really too long to mention. This, though, gets into some more granular issues about just what is left and what is right. Maybe it would be better to segment things into styles of political music, anti-war music. Edwin Starr, for instance, and his famous song War. What is it good for? Then you've got one of my favorite radical musicians, Gil Scott-Heron, who was never party political, as most of these musicians were not. He was, as I said in a previous video, the conscience of music and someone who paved the way for a lot of what they call conscious rap, meaning rap artists that are rhyming about things that are happening in the real world, the real consequences, proposing solutions, being political, being active. And there are so many great conscious rappers, from those in the underground to those who have had commercial success with conscious rap. There was a lot of it in the 90s, and there were many rappers who did both. People like Ice-T, the Tower, for instance, about the prison system and the justice system, but he also had fun story raps. You had Ice Cube, who was very political, and one of my favorite hip hop albums, Death Certificate, very political. Tupac, specifically in his early days, very, very political, very, very conscious. West Coast Cam, a great conscious rapper, everything he does is oozing with political, social, and even religious commentary. But what made me think of this in the context of this debate that everyone can't really stop talking about is this list that the New York Times published. And it was originally from the not the National Enquirer, but the National Review, William F. Buckley's magazine, which I don't think anyone reads anymore, but there you go. But people were still talking about it in the early 2000s. And they put a list of songs together that they say reflects conservative values, because the songs that reflect progressive, radical, or left-wing values kind of speak for themselves. It's less easy to find those that have right-wing or conservative values. But the list that the New York Times came up with is absolutely terrible because it's inaccurate. There's some great songs on there, but it's inaccurate. And I'm just going to go through some of them. So it says the number one song, and this is a list of so-called conservative songs, is We Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who from the Great Who's Next album, one of my favorite songs of all time. Now, this song is what I would call politically ecumenical. It's neither left or right, it's both. It's meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Well, that's really a criticism of everything. It's a criticism about hypocrisy. It's a call to action for people to wake up from false hope. I think there's something in that song for everyone. So that doesn't make sense to me. Taxman by the Beatles, number two. Well, yeah, traditionally, in the US specifically, it's the Republicans who tend to favor somewhat lower taxes, though I think most people would agree that when you're paying it, it's always too high. Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. That really is just a laundry list of political figures and concepts. A good song, but in terms of its lyrical content, kind of a poor man's We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel, absent from this song. Then you've got Sweet Home Alabama by Leonard Skinner. Now, this one is an interesting one because there's a reference, not by name, but a clear reference to Alabama Governor George Wallace, who was once a Democrat, then ran as a third party for president. He was a very complicated man, but he's probably known best for his sort of post-1964 neo-segregationist policies, though he would later repute those later in life after an incident occurred where there was an assassination attempt on him when he ran for president in the 72 election. The line that they're referencing is in Birmingham, they love the governor, which is a reference to Wallace. And members of the band have over the years said, well, it's kind of a criticism, it's kind of a compliment, it's kind of neither. So even the artists themselves are ambivalent as to whether that was a pro or anti-Wallace song, or whether it was just sort of a pastiche of all of the things that meant something to Alabama in the early 70s when it was written. So I still think the New York Times or the National, I keep calling it the National Enquirer, but the National Review. Then you have Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys, a song about premarital sex. Well, it depends on which politician you're talking about. I'm obviously not going to read everything on the list. One that I felt was interesting, we talked about this recently, was 20th Century Man by the Kinks. Now, this is kind of an anti-bureaucratic anthem. Right wing, left wing, well, it depends. Both factions are guilty of having too much rules, too much regulation, too much bureaucracy at any given time. It's an excellent song, and it shows that you don't need to be party political to make a very, very astute political statement. Then you've got The Trees by Rush, which is something that kind of belongs on this list. Rush were not a conservative band, but they were a libertarian band, which put them sort of at odds with the more collectivist nature of many of the leftist groups of their time and of this time. And The Trees was in particular a song that combined ecological themes with anti-labor organization themes, with general anti-collectivism, because Neil Peart, the lyricist and drummer of Rush, was very much a libertarian and an anti-collectivist. So, okay, we can say that that was on the list. Then we've got one that's just coming out of left field in a way. My City Was Gone by the Pretenders. Now, this is all about the formation of the Rust Belt, how the great industrial places of the American Midwest became decimated. And the song was really anti-Reagan, and yet it was given new life around 10 years after it was written by the popular radio host, an outright conservative, Rush Limbaugh, who used the song as his bumper music. And the Pretenders didn't like that, but I think they reached an agreement where any royalties that they made from the Limbaugh show would go to a charity that Rush Limbaugh didn't like. Hey, that's a compromise. So everyone was happy, I guess. I'm just going to go through Get Over It by the Eagles. I don't see how that's political at all. Cult of Personality by Living Colour. Well, Living Colour was certainly not a conservative band. They were quite radical. Kicks by Paul Revere and the Raiders, that isn't political at all. Rock the Casbah by The Clash, that was just sardonic. It wasn't party political at all. Heroes by David Bowie, that was about love. It wasn't about human nature. It wasn't about party politics. Another Rush tune, Red Barchetta. Yeah, I guess you could say that that was conservative from a philosophical point of view, because it's a song that idealizes the past over a bureaucratic present. And that's a theme obviously present in many Rush songs. Der Kommissar by After the Fire. Uh, nah. And obviously it was written by Falco. I don't see how that's political. I think this is just sloppy journalism that, oh, anything that references East Germany has to be political rather than just a commentary on a time and place. See what I mean, kids? Battle of Evermore, Led Zeppelin, not political at all. Capitalism by Oingo Boingo, that was sardonic. And the list goes on, but there are actually some songs that really do have a defined conservative message, and they left all of them off. Now, one of them is an early 70s song by Seals and Crofts, one of my very favorite bands. Great, great vocal harmony. And this was a song that didn't say anything about Republicans or Democrats, but it touched on an issue that would become one of the biggest points of division among the Republicans and Democrats in the following decades. And this was the song Unborn Child, and it was a response to the Roe v. Wade decision at the time, and it was a song that was anti-abortion. Seals and Crofts, both of them, were members of the Baha'i faith and had very strong views about that. That was that. Now we go to an album that I've talked about before, and this was Good Singin', Good Playing by Grand Funk Railroad, produced by Frank Zappa, a very political man who we'll get to in a moment. My Good Singing, Good Playing was all full of politics. It was released on the eve of the bicentennial celebration of the US. And you have a song that's literally called Don't Let 'Em Take Your Gun. A pro Second Amendment song that's traditionally associated with Republicans and conservatives. And the whole album in general is sort of a bit like that. There's the song 1976, and that references 1776. So there you go. Frank Zappa was obviously someone who hated Ronald Reagan, but he called himself a conservative. And by that, he meant a kind of constitutional fundamentalist. And at that time, he thought that it was the conservative movement of the 80s, the people surrounding the evangelical movement around the Reagan administration, who were pushing the country away from a strict libertarian constitutionalist point of view. And so Zappa, where do you really put him? He's mocked both parties. On the Broadway The Hard Way album, there's all sorts of politics. The Green Plate Hotel, what's that line? I'll try to remember it off the top of my head. Um, Republicans is great if you're a multimillionaire. Democrats is fair if all you own is what you wear. God, I love Zappa. He's so fun. And so you see that. Some of the best songs, though, in that political realm are the ones that really don't give away the person's politics. I mean, there are a lot of anti-commercialist songs. We talked about the Tubes, Neil Young with "This Notes for You," a sort of criticism of the "This Buds for You" Bud Light campaign. And now we have other controversial Bud Light campaigns, and we have controversial Neil Young, who seems to be in favor of various pharmaceutical products that Joe Rogan isn't. They had a whole arguing about that on Spotify, but Neil Young's music is back on Spotify, and Rogan's podcast never left Spotify. So there you go. In terms of what's the best political song of all time, I don't know. We could say Pink Floyd's The Final Cut, Roger Waters, very political. He makes his views widely known. Neil Young is another one, very political. Gil Scott-Heron, probably my favorite political artist, along with Roger Waters and Pink Floyd. Those two are really great. There's so many important ones. Frank Zappa, even though he's his lyrics are so multi-dimensional, you could definitely put him on that kind of list. But the point is, it's wrong to sort of pigeonhole songs unless the lyrics and or the artist make it very clear. Ted Nugent, for instance, I mean, most of his songs, at least from his sort of heyday, are just your classic rock and roll lyrics. Love, sex, rock and roll, good times, partying, that sort of thing. But obviously, he's very much a Republican, very much right wing. So there you go. It takes all to tango. I think all of the music is good, but on this day when everyone's talking politics, I thought we might bring it into the musical realm. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.